All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon. Welcome to our DataBytes Lunch and Learn session. This month, we're going to be talking about the Employee Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging survey results. This is a survey that we administered and conducted last fall. And so we are just getting the data back, all crunching the numbers and starting to share out the information college-wide. So before we jump into it, for those of you on the call with me today, and for those of you who might be watching the recording in the future, I just wanted to start with grounding us in our college's diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging statement. This is a philosophy statement that's posted on our public website. So it's available for everyone to view, but for anyone who's not familiar with it, who hasn't seen it before, I thought this might be a good starting place for us to just consider this language as we start to look at the results of the survey together and consider some of the findings that we collected. I'll just pause for a moment to give everyone a few seconds to read through this. So as I mentioned, we administered this survey, the DEIB specific employee engagement survey back in October of 2022. And the purpose of the survey was really threefold. First of all, we wanted to follow through on some of the commitments that we made from the last time that we administered an employee engagement survey in the fall of 2020. Back in fall 2020, we administered the PACE employee engagement survey. For those of you who participated in that, thank you. You might remember the PACE survey was a survey that we partnered with a third-party vendor to administer. It was a more traditional employee engagement survey, and we selected a set of sub-questions from that survey to satisfy some of the tracking and measurement that we wanted to conduct around strategic goal number 3 for the college, which is to foster a community of DEIB. So first and foremost, we wanted to follow up from that commitment and make sure that we had continuous measurement of those data points for tracking for strategic plan purposes. Right now, strategic goal number 3 is really framed around employee sentiment around DEIB. And so giving us that ability to track longitudinally how perspectives are shifting around DEIB really helps us to understand the culture that's being fostered through this work. And it helps to inform some baseline data for the DEIB Council. We know that tracking survey results related to employee sentiment only around DEIB efforts isn't the totality of work that's happening around DEIB. And so while this survey does give us another point in time measurement of employee attitudes around this work, this will really help to kind of frame up and shape the body of work that we engage in with the DEIB Council to be more intentional about how we're measuring DEIB efforts around the college and help to inform some of the future activities for that group. So how did we arrive at this survey that we administered back in the fall? So as I mentioned, back in fall 2020, we administered the PACE employee survey. And at the time, we made a decision to tack on an optional diversity kind of subscale that was a custom addition that we chose to include in our version of the survey. That provided us with 15 questions from that fall 2020 employee survey that were already thematically linked to DEIB efforts. We knew that that was limited in scope, and so for the fall 2022 survey, we wanted to add in some additional questions that might be a bit more reflective of the college's DEIB focus. And so we worked with and through the DEIB Council to try and generate some additional questions that spoke more clearly to RIO's efforts in this space. So based on the feedback from the council and from some third-party surveys that we looked at from other colleges and universities or other organizations that are engaged in this type of work, we incorporated an additional 14 questions to complement those 15 questions from the original survey. We tacked on one additional kind of open-ended question where we asked employees to provide any commentary or qualitative data that they might want to provide around DEIB work. And so we landed at a total of 30 total survey items, 15 from the original survey, 14 newly developed questions, and then the one open-ended survey question for everyone to give a sense of their perspectives on DEIB work. The questions were all rated on a 5-point scale that ranged from strongly agree to strongly disagree. And so a lot of the reporting that we have is based on that agreement level, where we want to look at, out of all the total responses, how many employees are indicating some level of agreement, whether strongly in support of or nominally in support of some of the work that's going on. In terms of response rates, we achieved about a 19% response rate. The survey was sent out to all employees at the college, so faculty, staff, full-time, part-time, everybody was invited to participate. We received just shy of 450 total responses and again, achieved a 19% response rate. This was down from the 30% response rate that we received in fall 2020. I think the biggest thing that likely played into that is back in fall 2020, this survey was sent out via a third party. When you do that, you get a stronger response rate traditionally, as folks tend to trust the anonymity factor a little bit more so than when surveys are administered internally. For our purposes here, we wanted to make sure that we had an instrument that was reflective of our specific language and operating goals, and so we chose to administer it internally. We did protect anonymity and privacy. We can't tie the results back to any one individual. We can only tie them back to the department or the division that employees indicated when they were participating in the survey. So before we dive into the results, I wanted to talk a little bit about what the responses look like in terms of representation of college communities. This first chart that you can see here is looking at the different types of employees that responded to the survey. The blue columns are indicating the most recent data that we collected from the fall 2022 administration, while the green or yellow columns are looking at the PACE 2020 survey data, the original survey that we conducted back in fall 2020. As you can see, the results are pretty evenly distributed in terms of comparisons between 2022 and 2020. The big unknown bucket from 2020 is that in that survey, employees did have the ability to ignore or skip some of those demographic questions. We enforced compliance with those questions this time around, so we kind of forced a response on some of those so that we had more accurate data and a better representation of where that information was coming from. So that's what's going on there. Similarly, you can see a trend that's similar with the breakdown by employee division. Academic affairs had the largest collection of survey responses, as is expected with all the faculty and academic affairs staff categorized under that bucket. And so similar responses that we saw from 2020 to 2022 in both breakdown types here. In terms of our key results, these are kind of the executive summary stats, if you will. So if you remember when we talked a bit about the survey mechanics and methodology, we talked about how we were reporting on the data based on overall agreement. So when we're talking about agreement, we're talking about the number of respondents that indicated that they either agreed or strongly agreed with any type of statement. So overall, we saw a 69% overall agreement score on survey results across all 29 items rather for this survey. That was down a bit compared to 2020, but please keep in mind that we added some additional questions. We intentionally added in some more content that was more Rio specific in terms of our DEIB work. So although we did see a decline, we're feeling like this is a bit more of a accurate reading in terms of our DEIB work. We were able to thematically group each of the questions along the different subscales of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So if you think of each of those, 4 components as standalone categories that we're surveying, we've got separate survey questions that speak to each of those themes. And so for each of those categories or subscales, belonging was the strongest rated subscale at 73% agreement. The top 3 items that we saw from the survey were that student diversity is important at this institution. The institution is accepting of people from different backgrounds, and employees feeling like they're treated with respect at the college. Where we might have some opportunities are students from diverse backgrounds feeling that their perspectives are incorporated into policies and decision making. Some concerns potentially around teaching and learning decisions and integrating the perspectives of diverse students into teaching and learning. And students and employees, feeling like they're struggling to find communities or groups where they can belong at the college. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we dig into the qualitative analysis towards the end of the presentation. In terms of the detailed findings, this is where I was mentioning we're able to really link each of the survey questions to one of the subscales or one of the categories, if you will, of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. We know that the needs and attitudes that we're assessing for diversity versus belonging look very different, and so we want to make sure that we have an accurate reading on each of these components that speak to the work of the totality of DEIB at the college. So the items that you see checked with a blue check mark or kind of that verified check mark are top performing items across the entire survey. Items that might have the red octagonal stop sign or X are showing items that were in the bottom items of the entire survey. So keep those in mind as we review the next few slides. We talked a little bit about those first two items already. Student diversity is important at this institution. My institution has accepted people of different backgrounds. Those were the top two rated items across the entire score. You can see that out of a total possible 5, that the mean scores or average scores for those were about 4.4 and 4.3, or 82% give or take agreement scale. And you can see the various scores ticking down through the other survey items related to diversity. Within equity, this was one of the areas that we have some more opportunity for growth. We didn't have any top performing items within the equity subscale, but we did have 2 bottom performing items here. Students from diverse backgrounds are satisfied with their educational experiences. Again, this is speaking only to employee perspectives on this statement. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the next few slides here. And again, students from diverse backgrounds believe that institutional policies incorporate their perspectives. So I just want to make it clear that this isn't student feedback, this is employee feedback about how employees perceive students are feeling about their level of satisfaction with the institution. It's important for us to want to get a reading on that from the students themselves, but it's also important for us to understand how employees feel about the way in which we're serving students. Inclusion was an interesting subscale for us. This subscale has the fewest number of questions related to it. It didn't have any top performing items, but it only did have the one bottom performing item, and that's around the college's responsiveness to suggestions for change. This was something that we saw reflected on some previous employee engagement surveys, and we'll look at that here in just another slide or two. But some opportunities for growth here, certainly, but this subscale was kind of middle of the road, if you will, for us in terms of the overall survey results. And then finally, belonging. This, as we talked about, was the strongest performing subscale. You can see here that 3 of the items from this subscale were in the top 5 total rated items across the entire survey. There was one bottom rated survey item, which we spoke to a little bit around affinity and individuals feeling like they have communities that resonate with their interests. The nice thing about belonging is I think that this speaks to a lot of the work that's really been done intentionally over the last several years, since 2019 probably, when we collected the most recent survey data from the district office around employee engagement. Back then, we had some troubling results around employee sense of belonging, and shortly thereafter, we kicked off a lot of the work around the 4 practices of engagement and many of the other channels that President Smith has really implemented with respect to fostering that sense of community around the college. So I think what we're seeing here is a representation of that intentional work and a lot of the growth that's happened in that space in the college over the last several years. This this chart is admittedly a bit overwhelming, but it gives us a bit of perspective and transparency into the results of different divisions around the college. The best way to probably look at this for those of you who are on the call, those of you who might be watching the recording, is to try and identify which color is representative of your specific service area, and try and track that along the axis as you look at the scores related to all the other divisions across the different subscales of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I'll just highlight a couple of key points that I wanted to bring to consideration for you to get a sense of how teams are trending compared to the last time that we surveyed around these similar types of components. So IT or information services was the only group that had higher mean scores in all categories compared to 2020. I know that Vice President O'Shea has been doing a ton of work to try and foster that sense of community around the team. And so, obviously we're seeing the results of that playing out here in the survey results. Public services saw a decline in mean scores across all their categories and was the only team to see that. And again, I know that Vice President Hoban and our team has been working together to analyze some of the data around their needs and being able to track trends and attitudes there. Administrative services and employee services saw some ebbs and flows, so some up and some down, and there's much more detailed reporting available on this in the written analysis of the report. And generally speaking, all of the other divisions kind of trended right around in the same range. So, I think the key takeaways are that there were some teams that had some big wins, some teams that might have seen some drop off in some areas of focus, but by and large, teams across the college felt pretty similarly around some of these ideas and metrics that we did when we conducted the survey 2 years ago. I mentioned a couple slides ago that one of the areas of focus of the college since 2019 has really been around belonging. And the data that we're looking at right now help to frame up some of the work that's been going on around that. Back in spring 2019, the district office sent out an employee engagement survey, as they do every few years. We just received one again this year. So, likely many of you participated in that survey this spring. Back in the 2019 results of that survey, we didn't have the greatest scores related to belonging and communication around the college. And so there's been a lot of intentional work to shore up some of those areas of opportunity. But we did have the ability to track a subset of those questions across the different survey mechanisms that we've used since that was originally administered a few years ago, so we can get some longitudinal readings on some of this data and track the effectiveness of some of the work that we've been engaged in over time. So as you're looking at the table, these are 5 questions that were originally presented on that Maricopa District Office survey back in 2019. When we administered our own internal employee engagement survey in fall 2020 through the third-party vendor, we intentionally incorporated another subset of those questions so that we could track progress on those items. So the first column of data shows the Maricopa survey. The second column, or the middle column of data, shows the results from fall 2020. And that last column on the far right-hand side shows the same questions, the same results from fall 2022. You can see that across all survey questions, with the exception of the last question, we're still maintaining the progress that we made between spring 2019, and fall 2020. We did have a drop off in the question, I feel like I belong, or the statement, I feel like I belong, from spring 2019 to fall 2022, but otherwise everything is still trending upwards. Across the board, everything ticked down slightly between fall 2020 and fall 2022. Anecdotally, I think one of the things that we could probably point to in considering these results, in addition to different types of employees responding to the survey this time around, is that, back in fall 2020, with the pandemic fresh on everybody's minds and things, rapidly changing and evolving at that point in time, we were really, coming together as a college community. We were engaged a lot more in all employee meetings, those, bi-weekly employee meetings where the entire college was coming together. And although we were, struggling with the pandemic, we're certainly benefiting from, some of that increased collaboration and the time we were spending together as a college-wide community. So, there's no scientific evidence that I have to suggest that's what's going on, but, anecdotally, as, we're considering some of these trends and some of the thoughts and attitudes that were pervasive at the time, that's certainly something that we can't ignore. We did, as I mentioned, conduct or give the opportunity for employees to provide some qualitative feedback through the form of an open-ended question. And so based on all the comments and suggestions and feedback that we received from that question, we engaged in a qualitative analysis to try and understand some of the themes that were present in the comments that we got back from folks. We received 74 comments that, had some sort of substance to them. There were plenty of comments that, just suggested, none or not applicable. And so we scrubbed some of those out. But 74 of the comments that came back had areas of substance that we could, theme out and drill into a little bit further. We conducted a sentiment analysis to try and understand what the attitude or perspective was of the comment. So for those 74 comments that received, 26% of them were positive in nature, 15% were neutral. Things like, keep up the good work, something to that effect. And 59% were critical, offering, either dissatisfaction or in many instances, critical could also indicate that they are offering some sort of suggestion for improvement. The themes of diversity and equity were probably the most common in terms of the critical comments that were represented. So for 61% of all of the critical comments that we received, in one way or another, those comments spoke to the areas of diversity and equity. So those are opportunities for us to look into. The positive themes that we saw from the comments were that employees felt that there was a really strong sense of authenticity in the DEIB Council and the body of work that they've put forth. We know that DEIB work, or DEI, as is commonly seen across other colleges and other industries, is in vogue, is fashionable right now. And so, it's no surprise that the college is engaged in this work, although it's important to us and we want to continue the good efforts there. Folks are feeling like there is an authentic and strong sense of importance behind this work at the college. And so it's something that, I think is speaking well to the way in which the DEIB Council has handled this work and is rolling it out across the college. There was a strong sense of feeling valued as an employee at the college, a sense of pride that Rio is engaged in DEIB work and taking on this challenge, and feeling that Rio offers a safe and inclusive environment for employees across the college. Where we saw some critical themes or, some areas of opportunity is that although generally speaking, there was a strong sense of pride and, authenticity, around the DEIB work, there were some comments that were resentful or resistant around DEIB work. So maybe some opportunities to engage those types of employees that might, still be hesitant or reticent around some of this work, and trying to offer some opportunities to engage those groups. DEIB work perceived as incomplete. I think one of the big things that came out around this was, a lack of the student focus. And so that's certainly something that, we hope to dig into on my team alongside and in partnership with the DEIB Council in terms of how we can measure the impacts of DEIB at Rio around the student perspective. There were some critical themes around lack of representation in college leadership, and this was also something that we witnessed and measured back in fall 2020 that carried through to the most recent survey results. Some sentiment around exclusionary hiring practices and promotion practices, and then some inequity for part-time and specially funded employees feeling like they don't have the opportunities available to them that maybe full-time employees do. So all this offers us some additional perspective outside of the survey questions themselves that we can start to dig into and really work as a group and as a college community on improving. So where do we go next with this information? Well, right now we're presenting the findings to the college community. That's always important to us to show that we're not just collecting this data for a rubber stamp or for a check mark. We want to hear from employees, learn from your experiences, learn from your perspectives, and figure out how we can improve as an institution. We do have the ability to disaggregate the data to certain department or division levels that we can share with the leadership of those teams. We are being very conscious and mindful not to be able to identify any one individual with the results of the survey. No individual names or anything like that are tied back to the survey results. But in many instances, we are able to identify groupings of departments, typically that line up to a dean or something to that effect, so that those leaders can consider the data and engage their teams in opportunities for self-reflection and growth as a result of the responses that we received. And so that's where the third bullet point comes in. We want to create action items for follow-up and accountability around that. Some of the ways that we might do that is engaging the college's development team, engaging the executive team, or president's cabinet, engaging the dean's council to really own the results of this survey and make conscious efforts to improving some of the opportunities that were represented in the sentiment and perspectives that were shared. We want to work with the DEIB Council to improve these types of tools moving forward. This survey was really a relic of what we had done in fall 2020 and wanting to make good on the commitments that we had made to conduct another follow-up survey following that instrument. But we know that it was lacking and we know that it was incomplete. And so now, the work ahead of us is to create new mechanisms and new ways that we can measure the work and the impact of the DEIB Council and all of the breadth and scope of DEI that is existing within the college community. And so we want to come up with new surveys, new tools, new metrics that we can use to measure that data and really speak to the work of strategic goal number 3 in a more better and complete way. And then just as a heads up, and kind of the final step here is that the district office is considering and planning to conduct a DEI survey that is tentatively scheduled for fall 2023. So we'll be anxious to see what's included on that survey, how they're looking to measure that for the district's purposes, and how our results might compare on that survey with the results that we collected on our own internal survey. Before I conclude, I do just want to give some acknowledgments and shout outs. This is none of this was my work. This was all a team effort very much. So just want to thank the partnership with Dr. Floyd Hardin and the DEIB Council and all the work that we've done to try and get to this point, knowing that there's still a lot of great work to be done moving forward. There was also a DEIB Council data sub-team that was assembled to help kind of consult on this particular survey and then maybe ways that we can improve moving into the future. So want to shout out specifically Angela Clark, Christina Bolliard, and John Bastian around the work that they did in considering this survey for us and trying to help improve things for us moving forward. Cheyenne Hardin on my team that conducted the data analysis and put all the survey together in the survey software so that it could be sent out. So huge shout out to Cheyenne, thank you there. And also to Dr. Carol Schmidt for her leadership around this work and helping to inform next steps and where we want to take this moving forward for strategic planning purposes. So with that, I haven't seen the chat whatsoever throughout this entire thing. So I don't know if there's any questions that came through there or anything that anybody might have to toss out, but that's the end of the slides, as it were.
Hey, Zach, I had one question.
Please.
I noticed the public service responses were some of the lowest rated. Do you have a comparison of how many people participated from public service this time to last time?
I do, and that's something that we'll be able to share with VP Hoban around, how they might be able to work with that information. That's details that I probably don't want to share in a public forum like this, just so that we can protect, the privacy of those respondents. But yeah, that's available in the more detailed, granular reporting that will be provided to leadership of those teams.
Okay, thank you.
So one other thing that I would toss out there is that there is a more detailed written analysis that Cheyenne provided that goes into some more detail around this, breakdowns of the results by different demographics. And so I would encourage you to take a peek at that. You can find that in our newsletter, our data digest that goes out on a semester by semester basis. You can also find that on our institutional research employee portal site. So please take a peek at that. And then just be on the lookout for any future sessions or work that might be conducted around this specifically. In addition to that, I would also invite you all to join us at our Lunch and Learn or DataBytes session at the end of April, where we'll be talking about our new predictive analytics model and all the great work that's gone into that. So thank you all so much for attending. We appreciate your time today. And to everybody who's watching the recording, thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you, Zach.
Thank you.